All right, welcome to another episode of the Record Shepherds. We're doing it remote this time. What's going on, Jason?
Yeah, it's all good, Tim. Good to see your face. I feel like the Record Shepherds have gone international.
We've gone international. Where are you at right now?
I am in Belfast, Northern Ireland, my hometown. I call it home because I feel like I've had so many homes. this is
Yeah.
this is home.
Is it weird? Does it like change every time you go back?
Uh, no, it doesn't. It doesn't. I feel like I plug back in, and it's very grounding for me to come back. Like it just feels like you're back to your roots, and you just fit straight
Yeah.
back in. Yeah,
Kind of like a refresh. Like you sort of are able to clean the toxic stuff from New York City and just like reset a little bit.
yeah, that's right. I haven't seen a rat in 24 hours, so that's good.
I was actually just saying to a friend that people who wear like open-toed shoes in New York are brave. You know,
I know.
because if a rat crawls over your foot, you have to burn your foot off.
You do. You
It's
do.
just
That's what I'd be doing.
that's the
I,
law. Yeah.
I carry an acid bath on me at all times in the
Exactly.
summer for those reasons.
I guess we have gone international because I was in Mexico too. So
Yes, yeah. How
yeah,
was that?
it was beautiful, man. It was good. It just kind of interesting that some parts of Mexico are literally in the middle of the desert, right? And that's a
Hmm.
lot of the West Coast in general. So it's just interesting to see like what people can build sort of in like this hot climate, and just
Yeah.
they've just adapted to be able to withstand that and then thrive and then yeah, it was fun, man. I did get a little food bug, stomach bug, but
Mm,
I'm getting over that, so that's good.
that
But
happens.
I will
That happens.
I'll eat the
Could be the
tacos
ice.
again. Could be the
Yeah,
ice.
it could be the ice. A lot of people say don't have ice in your drink.
I
We're
definitely
not
had
used to it.
I definitely had like a frozen ice treat for sure. So yeah, maybe that
Ooh,
was it.
that
But
could be it.
it's all good. It's all good. We're going international, and hopefully, as we travel, we'll be able to do this more and more. Once we can actually be in the studio. So we're
Yeah.
we're, we're missing Danny right now, but shout out to
Missing
Danny.
Danny. Man, missing the what color would you call that? Is it like a sage or a
Yeah,
seafoam green? Seafoam green
M-
sofa.
missing the seafoam green sofa. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah. So
But
yeah, what do we got today? What are we talking about?
well, yeah, like I think it's when we're both traveling, it's good that we can do this as sort of like a makeshift. We're not on the seafoam green sofa, but this is like a good way just to keep up to speed with what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like I wanted to jump on with you today just to discuss something that happened last week. Well, within the week, I guess we're still this week. But it was in relation to the mechanical royalty rates for
Mm.
on-demand streaming, and there's been a lot of talk and a lot of clamor in this space, like particularly from the songwriting community. And I think it's fair to say that the songwriting community and the publishers who represent them for a long time now have wanted more recognition for the value that the songwriters bring
Right.
to the music industry. And when I say recognition, I don't mean like another award show or something like this. I mean the bunts,
Yeah.
right? Because it's well known that we talked about it previously on our podcast. We've talked about that the publishing game is a pennies business,
Mm-hmm.
and when it comes to the record labels and the sorts of like dollars that they're making, it's usually a small fraction that goes to the publishers and songwriting community. And I think we've lived in an environment now where costs of living are kind of spiraling out of control in a lot of places. And I think songwriters have been saying like, hey, everyone's getting like a decent piece of the pie, and we're stuck on a smaller percentage.
And not even to mention is a lot of the places where these songwriters live tend to be the places that are like the most expensive, right? Specifically in the United States. Obviously, there
Mm-hmm.
can be songwriters anywhere, but in terms of like the community of songwriters, it's either like, New York,
Yeah.
Nashville, or LA. So when you
Yeah.
talk about expenses or the cost of living, these are the communities that are directly affected by that.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. It's real. It's
yeah,
real.
and then, as we seek to like modernize the current music industry, because a lot, there's a few of the laws that are sort of outdated and not really caught up. Um, this is one of the things, the mechanical royalty rate for streaming is something that needs to reflect, like you said, the contribution of that songwriter, which it's currently the big topic.
Yeah. So might as well like just sort of put the cards on the table and
Mm-hmm.
discuss what's actually happened in last week. So essentially, I think the maybe we just say that there was an announcement
Mm-hmm.
from the parties, let's say the stakeholders on each side of the equation.
Right.
Like, so we're talking about the actual streaming services, because in the United States and I think it's and on most territories around the world actually, it's the streaming services themselves who are responsible for paying mechanical royalties to the publishers and songwriters for the on-demand streaming slash mechanical reproduction of the song every
Mm-hmm.
time there's a track streamed, and it's a percentage amount, right? And that percentage is set every 5 years, but for the next 5 year period, by an independent panel called the Copyright Board.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that's like a federal board
Entity.
that's set
Yeah.
up. Yeah, exactly, and a panel of judges, right? The copyright judges who set that rate. And what they're trying to do is basically come up with a figure that fairly represents what you would get to if there was a willing buyer and a willing seller, right, on both sides of the party. And what we're talking about here is the people, the rights holders who actually own the songs, the songwriters and publishers, and then the people who want the license, get that mechanical license, which is the streaming services themselves. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And we just had the announcement concerned the next 5 year period from 2023 through
27.
2027. Yeah. So I think that's like 5 years all in. So, and they announced essentially that both parties on either side, so we'll call them the publishers and we'll call it the DSPs, the music streaming services,
Mm-hmm.
the trade bodies who represent the most of those, came to a settlement, which is essentially like a mutually agreed rate that they want to put in place. Now, it doesn't actually go into law. All they can do is submit a recommendation
Right.
to the Copyright Board, and they say to the Copyright Board, "Hey, we're the guys that are usually arguing about this constantly, and ahead of your decision making process, rather than wait for you to come to a decision and us start to fight about it like we usually do, ahead of it, we have got together and we are submitting. We've been able to agree on what we think the rate should be." So,
Which I think is a step in the right direction, right? I think it's a bit more
yeah,
transparency when it comes to like the rights owners and like the DSPs. The fact that we can now come to a point where we're negotiating a rate together, I think is a really good thing. And there's a long way to go, but yeah, I think that's good.
It is a good thing, and like that's actually, I think that's actually part of like of the genesis, like of how they got to this, because let's just explain one thing. So the rate that they've said, that they're recommending that the Copyright Board adapt, it's 15.35% of the streaming services revenues, okay, that they say should go to let's call it the songwriting community, like the rights holders of the actual songs. And just to be absolutely clear, we're distinguishing that from the rights holders of the record labels who
Right.
obviously have rights on the recordings. We're specifically talking about the copyright in the songs here.
Right.
So it was at 15.35% that they've put forward. We'll wait to see if that gets adopted by the Copyright Board, and we'll put a pin on that because there's one interesting point I'd like to come back to. But it is worthwhile noting that the prior 5-year period that we've just had, which was from 2018 to 2022,
Mm-hmm.
that rate was set by the Copyright Board as 15.1%, okay, of the streaming services revenues. That was set in 2018 and immediately was appealed by, in particular, most notably or famously, Spotify. I think Amazon and Google got on board. Apple famously did not appeal. I think they were quite willing to sit back and let Google, sort of put their necks on the line, and they did sort of reap the wrath of the songwriting community. I think Spotify got it in the neck. But anyway, that took a long period. There's a lot of legal arguments, like literally tens of millions of dollars were spent on either side, trying to argue the facts and do all this research and all the legal fees, etc., etc. And last month, I was going to say, it only got settled
Last month,
right? What are we in now? Like essentially August 2022, like 4.5 years into the 5-year period, it only got settled. So you get all this uncertainty over all this period, like songwriters or publishers, what are we going to get paid? What rate is it going to be? Is it going to be 15.1%, which the Copyright Board said it would, or would it be the old rate for the previous, which was 10.5%? It's a significant difference, and all this legal fees, etc., argument, mental energy, stress, and I think this time they've said, like, we can avoid all of that if we just get together and speak and hear each other and compromise.
Well, it is. I mean, it is interesting the fact that they were adamant about appealing that previous ruling of 15.1%, but they, as you said, were, not quick to, but, were seemingly more willing to agree to the 15.35% for the next 5 years. And that could just be simply because the jump is significantly less than the previous jump from 10.5% to 15.1%. But now that they sort of know that's what the rate is, then I feel like they're, willing to compromise a bit more in the incremental jumps. But I will say, just from the readings, that the 15.35% that both parties have sort of agreed on for the next term is 20% less than what the copyright owners or the rights owners, like the publishers, initially put forward. So it is still less than what originally they wanted.
Totally. I think there's two interesting points to say on that. You're right, because the NMPA, the National Music Publishers Association, which represents a lot of the publishers here in the United States, it's like the trade organization, they were the ones who said for this 2023 to 2027 period, they wanted the songwriters' cut of the pie to be 20%.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, the likes of Spotify, Amazon, and a few others, Pandora, Google, they were actually going the other way. I think Spotify more aggressively. They were actually saying, we want it to be put back to the old rate for the prior period. Like they wanted it to be 10.5%. Right, so they insane. Like what it used to be like around 2013. So I think that was like more like posturing from both sides, because like anything, you're going to end up somewhere in the middle. So you set your stall out, as at the extremes, and see where hopefully the Copyright Board lands somewhere in the middle. But nevertheless, I think there was, it's good that they've been able to get around the table, have reasoned arguments, and see where this ends up.
I'd be curious to know what percent of royalties was generated from streaming in 2013 versus what it is now? Because I think that too like plays probably a significant role in determining these these royalty rates. I'd
Totally.
imagine in 2013, and it's kind of hard to remember now because streaming wasn't as big back then, but I still would think it would probably be significant, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's certainly a lot bigger now. I don't have the actual stats on my fingertips, but it's increasing. Every year, growth is growth. It's like still it's slowed down in certain territories, but there's still a lot of territories that the streaming services have a lot more room for growth. So every year, songwriters will be making more money from on-demand streaming for
Right.
sure.
Right. And
But
one thing I wanted to ask you, and something that we
mhm.
had talked about, is the rate for mechanical royalties for streaming, for on-demand streaming, is a different rate than what's being negotiated for physical and digital downloads or sales. And why is
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. So, and this is actually a really interesting point, which I kind of wanted to leave it on. So I'll circle back to that. But to your question, you're right. There is a different streaming rate or mechanical royalty rate for streaming compared with physical manufacture of CDs and vinyl
Mm-hmm.
and digital downloads. As we were talking about, if this goes through, streaming is going to be 15.35%
Mm-hmm.
of the streaming company's revenues. When it comes to physical mechanical royalties on physical goods and digital downloads, it's not a percentage. It's a dollar amount here in the United States. In other territories abroad, it's actually more common that it is a percentage. But here, it was 9.1 cents per song.
Mm.
So if you had an album of 10 songs, you're going to be paying as a record label 91 cents to the rights holders of those songs. And it recently went up this year to 12 cents.
Mm.
So, but it's a fixed dollar amount or in cents, and it's two different parties that pay them. It's the record label who is tasked with actually paying the mechanical royalties, because if you think about it, it's the record label who wants to print CDs and vinyl, so it's them who need the license to copy that song for each CD or vinyl record that they print. And on the on-demand streaming, the people who need the license, who are going to be doing the sort of reproduction or the song in digital format, is the streaming service. So that's just the way it is, and it's like two different payees and two different rates.
And
So
and then with the with the streaming argument, it makes a bit more sense to me because like clearly you have two different parties being represented, right? You have like the actual rights owners of the song, and then you have like DSPs. I think when it comes to like the mechanical rate for physical and digital downloads, where it gets a bit convoluted for me is the same companies that own the major record labels are the same companies that own the major publishers, right? So
yeah, yeah,
legally it's a bit of a mess, right? Like if
yeah.
you guys are negotiating the rate, isn't it sort of like a, I don't know, a conflict of interest if it's the same companies that own both parties?
Yeah, yeah, there is that. And actually, it's funny you should say that, because one of the things that I wanted to talk about that I think is interesting about this latest on demand mechanical rate recommendation for the streaming
Mm-hmm.
is that it's only a recommendation at this point. It's like a mutually agreed recommendation, and you think that would carry a lot of weight because it's usually the two people who are arguing about what the rate should be the most. They've both reached agreement, they've submitted it to the copyright board, and the copyright board is ultimately tasked for setting the rate, and you'd think they will give a lot of credit to what these parties have submitted to them if it's a mutually agreed rate.
Because
However,
these are the experts in that industry, so you would think,
they're
you
the
know,
experts and they're the stakeholders. So the
right,
people who actually, are going to be, it's talk about a willing buyer and a willing seller.
right.
This is the buyer, this is the seller, and these people are agreeing, so it should hold a lot of weight. However, one of the things to go back to the physical and the download rate, that has been 9.1 cents per composition since 2006. And it was only earlier this year that the songwriting community saw an increase in that rate to 12 cents.
Wow.
And I think something that was really interesting, which I was actually unaware of until I did a bit of digging, it was the Copyright Board who set that rate, as always, that 12 cents. However, they had submitted to them another one of these mutually agreed recommended rates, that the physical rate continue to be 9.1 cents, the same rate that it had been since 2006. So even the publishers and the record labels got together and they decided, like, we'll recommend that it continues to be 9.1 cents. The Copyright Board took a look at that and they were like, what? How can it be that in 2022 you're giving us the same rate that you were paying in 2006? Something's off with that. Like, even if you take into inflation, it's like songwriters are going backwards in the actual spending power of what they're earning there. So, and it was also pointed out that, the people paying this rate, in the case of physical, the record labels, and the people who are, on the other side, which are the publishers, they're owned by the same people. They're owned by Universal, they're owned by Sony, they're owned by Warner. And there's people, I think essentially the Copyright Board, like they alluded to the there's smoke. I think they said there may not be fire, but there's smoke, and it's the Copyright Board's job to investigate if there's fire. Wow. And ultimately, they said, like, we hear your mutually agreed recommended rate of 9.1 cents. We don't agree. It can't be that. It's got to be a bump. You can't have the same rate for 16 years. So they raised it to 12 cents. And there's a lot of people that said, look, the real battle that the NMPA and the publishing community were preserving themselves for was this streaming rate, because that's where the world has gone.
Right.
What it has shown me, and what I think is interesting to point out, the lesson to take, is even when you have a mutually agreed recommended rate submitted to the Copyright Board, they might not go for it. The Copyright Board might not go for it. And in this instance, maybe there is a little bit of tactics there, that, we're seeing only a bump for the on-demand streaming rate of 0.25% over a 5-year period.
Wow.
And you think, like, is that really enough? Is that where the settlement is, considering that, the NMPA were pushing for 20%? But maybe that's just to cause, to save the legal fees, and it'll go to the Copyright Board, and the Copyright Board will take it, give weight to it, certainly, but maybe they'll take other factors like inflation, etc. So we'll see, but what do you think? Would you think 15.1 to 15.35 is like a decent return for the songwriting community?
I mean, I think it's also worth mentioning, and I don't know the exact numbers, but there is a lot of evidence to suggest that the major record labels have a significant stake in the streaming services as well, like either in stock or just purely by the relationship. So I think you're seeing a pattern of the people who are not the songwriters, right, or not the the publishers, who are actively trying to make sure the rate goes up as slowly as possible. It just is what it is. So, the 15.1 to 15.35, no, I think that's really low, especially if they've agreed that the mechanical rate on the physical side should have an increase of 32%, yet you're only increasing it by, however much percent from 15.1 to 15.35% is on the streaming side. There's a discrepancy there. So, and especially now how the music industry has shifted from, streaming generating significantly more revenue than physical sales and digital downloads. So, I think I don't know if do I hope the CRB rejects the 15.35% and says, hey, you guys got to go back and come with a better rate here. I think maybe that's likely to happen.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not so sure. And the only reason being is that unlike the physical mechanical rate, which had not moved since 2006, there was a significant increase in the on-demand streaming mechanical rate back in 2018. It went from 10.5%
right
to 15.1%. And I think a lot of people, and if you think about that, I'm not going to do the maths in my head, but let's call it 10 to 15. That's like a 50% hike,
right?
So I think the songwriting community probably, now that 15.1% rate for the period of 2018 to 2022, that has now been settled, that's set in stone. Maybe the the songwriting community figured that, like, look, we can't, because you can't keep going up and up and up. That's the one thing I think it's important to realize. It's a percentage, it's a pie, right? And there are three stakeholders that need to be paid out of this pie. There are the songwriting community, they're the artist and record label community, who are actually typically investing a lot more capital in, recording the music and marketing the music, etc., etc. And then you have the music streaming services, without whose technology and without whose platforms, there probably wouldn't be a music industry as we know it. It was in the doldrums before these streaming services came along.
Definitely. I mean, the streaming services sort of save the music industry. It's like almost like a deal with the devil in a sense.
Yeah, it's the old, and it's a great symbiotic relationship, but ultimately, there's sort of, it's always that relationship of love hate, isn't it?
Yeah, and I don't know. I wonder if there's a mechanism, and this might be like ignorant thinking, but to where like the mechanical rate can sort of rise and fall with inflation, almost like interest rates work. But
well, yeah, funny you should say that, because for the physical mechanical rate, that went up, as we talked about, from 9.1 cents to 12 cents. Part of the other, the conditions to that was that there would be a calculated increase for inflation, because as we talked about, the physical and download rate is a dollar amount. For percentages, when on the streaming, it's 15.35%. It takes care of itself because it's a percent. It's just a piece of the pie. So as inflation goes up and maybe subscription prices go up, you're still going to get your percentage. So you don't need to worry about inflation that way. It's just like you're just getting a slice of the pie, and it's like, how big can we afford to give? Can we afford to give you more of a slice? And the record labels would argue, no, we can't. And the streaming services themselves would argue, no, we can't, because it's either got to come from our slice or it's got to come from the record label's slice. So
right.
But listen, I think it's good news that it is in my opinion fair to say that the songwriting community have not been fairly represented in their slice of the pie does not, or has not to date, accurately reflected the value that they bring to the ecosystem. And listen, I think it's nice that there's going to be a little bit more money going back their way.
I think so. And I think, like you said, it's it's a complicated topic, right? Because at the end of the day, it's the technology from these streaming services that have allowed the music industry to sort of continue. However, you see a concerted effort from the streaming services to repeatedly find a reason to not pay songwriters, right? Whether it be, you know, negotiating what the actual rate is, or saying, hey, we don't actually know who to pay, so we're just going to take all this money and put it in one big pot because we don't know, who, like, what publishers to actually pay these out to, which is like where the Music Modernization Act comes in. And we need to do a whole episode on that as well, because I think that plays a significant role in what we're talking about today. But and I mean, they are acting in their interest, right? If you're a company, you want to try to pay out as little as you can, because at the end of the day, it's about the bottom dollar. But it's just interesting seeing online, at least, the jargon between like these major music publishers and the streaming services, and how everybody is claiming to be pro songwriter, pro artist, but at the end of the day, let's see it. And so I think these parties coming together and being able to negotiate independently of the CRB is a good step in the right direction. But we'll see how the relationship can improve.
Totally. And I think, as you said, it's much better that the songwriting community and even the streaming service community's energy can be spent in other ways of furthering each of their businesses. Like, you forget that, like, these legal disputes, it's energy, and it's like bashing heads, and it's executives' time, it's money. It's all energy, and ultimately, it's if you can dispense with all of the loggerheads, and you can put that energy, channel that energy into better sort of ventures for furthering like the music industry in general.
Definitely. Well, I think it was a good first run for our first Zoom Shepherd session.
Yeah, absolutely. Now that the Shepherds have gone international, I will be back. I can't wait to get back to New York to get on the seafoam green sofa, and we'll do another one.
Do another one of these.
Yeah, cool. Absolutely. So.
Well, yeah, this will definitely be on YouTube, and you can listen to the Record Shepherds where all podcasts are heard. If you have any questions, you can email us at therecordshepherds@gmail.com, and you can also follow us on social media at the Record Shepherds on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, etc. And yeah, just engage with us if you have any more questions, or if you have insight on today's topic. Feel free to hit us up.
Absolutely. And yes, as I say, I will be back to New York City shortly. If you're in the New York area and you're going to be swinging by, and you've got anything that you'd like to contribute to the conversation, please hit us up. We'd love to have you. We'd love to chat and maybe get you along and onto the sofa.
Amazing.
So that I think that's about it. And it just leaves it for me to say to continue to follow the guidance of the Record Shepherds.
Don't be the sheep.
Be the goat.
Woo!
Cheers.